Hello everyone and welcome back to another round of Tuesday Night Legacy, where we showcase Magic's most powerful formats. My name is Eugene and this is round 3 from our Pauper tournament on February 29th. We're actually showcasing two decks here that have a very similar value engine, using cards like Ichor Wellspring and Experimental Synthesizer to get a bunch of value out of the deck. Specifically, Boros Synthesizer uses bounce effects like Glinthawk and Core Skyfisher in order to replay the Synthesizer and the Ichor Wellspring, constantly either exiling or drawing extra cards, being able to finish the game either with flyers or a huge Seeker of the Way, or, just a ton of creatures and a Goblin Bushwhacker. Whereas the Metal Jund list is using very similar cards, the Ichor Wellspring and the Synthesizer, and abusing that with things like Deadly Dispute and Glimmerbairn and Sprout Swarm. You make a bunch of tokens with Kuldotha Rebirth, and you can keep buying back the Sprout Swarm and completely overwhelm your opponent with tokens, giving them plus X plus O with the Rites of Initiation, or just over time shooting them down with the makeshift munitions. So which of these value decks is going to outvalue the other? Let's get started. We have David on the play here, just firing off a Chromatic Star, one of the cards that is basically a cantrip for him. He can either draw that card, or he's always going to draw that card, but if he sacrifices it to the Kuldotha Rebirth or to the Deadly Dispute, he gets to draw extra cards, or he can use it to cycle his mana if he needs to. We see some Synthesizers coming down on both sides of the field, drawing some extra cards. We see that Rebirth go off, getting rid of the Ichor Wellspring on David's side, getting him some Frank Reynolds Goblin tokens here, and drawing him a card along the way for 1 red mana. A pretty good deal. Pedro deciding on what land to play here. Looks like that's a Rustvale Bridge, paying 1 for the Glinthawk. Forced to return an artifact to his hand, but since it was the Wellspring, he gets to draw an extra card to do so. Throwing down that Thraben Inspector, getting a clue, but misses his land drop. Or did he miss his land drop? I think David went first, so... Oh, there's the land. Got that Boros Garrison in play, having to bounce the plains back to hand, trying not to set himself back, being able to play a land that can come into play untapped. We see 2 Glimmerbairns come into play on David's side. These can be sacrifice a token at any time, give it +2/+2. Basically presenting 2, 4, 6, 8 damage on the field right now. If he were to attack, obviously he can't attack this turn, they just came into play. Seeing a cycled Ash Barrens to fix his mana a little bit, getting a mountain. I think we're just going to pass the turn here. Both of these decks do run a full suite of Lightning Bolt. Pedro has an additional 4 Lightning Bolt-esque effects with the Galvanic Blasts. Since he runs so many artifacts in the deck, it almost always hits for 4. Tapping 2, getting that Ichor Wellspring we knew in his hand, getting to draw an extra card, more value there. And set up with that 2/2 flyer. Haven't seen a land drop yet. Gonna Lightning Bolt one of the Franks, get him out of there. I guess it's better to Lightning Bolt a Goblin instead of Lightning Bolting a Glimmerbairn. Although, oh yes, it's effectively the same effect, because the Glimmerbairn is a 1/2. We see a Lightning Bolt back on the Glinthawk there. On David's turn, he did play the makeshift munitions, which is going to be huge in controlling the board going forward here. Being able to just pay 1 to shoot something after sacrificing a creature or an artifact. Can always sacrifice the Chromatic Star, draw a card, deal a damage. See a Radiant Fountain come down, gaining a little bit of life. Going to play a Core Skyfisher, another bounce effect, albeit 1 more mana, but you can bounce, I think, anything. Core Skyfisher, just a permanent back to your hand, doesn't have to be an artifact. But played the Ichor Wellspring again, drawing 3 cards for the turn if you include the first draw of the turn. Pretty darn good for 4 mana. David kind of stuck on his play here. It doesn't look like he has a ton of cards in hand. Just passes it back, just has his 1 Frank, 2 Glimmer Barons, and the makeshift munitions. With the core Skyfisher having 3 toughness, a little tough to get by with the makeshift munitions. Playing the Seeker of the Way on Pedro's side. Every time an artifact is cast or a non-creature spell, this thing gets prowess, +1/+1, and lifelink until end of turn. Could end up being really big. Ooh, we see the Sprout Swarm try to go off with the buyback, basically tapping 5 mana to get the 1/1 and buy it back to hand, so get a Saproling into play. Pedro did respond by shooting one of the Glimmer Barons with a Galvanic Blast, but David just ripped one right off the top, putting another Glimmer Baron in play. We know exactly what's in his hand, so Pedro just kind of going off here, getting a bunch of value off of his clue, and then he played an Ichor Wellspring, get another clue, sacrifice that clue. I guess he only sacrificed 1 clue, excuse me. We see the Glimmer Baron doing its thing, or the Sprout Swarm, excuse me. And a couple more tokens. We see the that land, the Colony Garden, getting a 0/1 plant token into play. David clearly put a lot of love and care into his tokens here, all of these customized tokens. Sorry, I don't understand the reference on the Saproling or the plant. And I can't really see them close enough to be able to make out who they are. David, if you want to tell us in the comments who all is on your tokens, we'd love to hear it. See the Glint Hawk come down. Ichor Wellspring back to hand, right back to play. I'm playing the Experimental Synthesizer. So this doesn't actually draw cards, this exiles cards, but you can play lands off of it if you exile a land. Yeah, keeping track of the prowess triggers. Kind of going off here a little bit. So the Experimental Synthesizer is similar to the Ichor Wellspring, as it is an enter or leave effect. Attacking into these tokens isn't... I mean, there's not a ton that can happen here, because David can declare blocks and then fire one with the makeshift munitions to just kind of shoot Pedro and negate the life total or life gain effect from the Seeker of the Way. We see another Sprout Swarm. We see the block declared. Shoot Pedro for 1. Shoot something for 1. Casting Sprout Swarm again. Shooting the Glint Hawk. So no damage dealt with the Seeker of the Way. A Glint Hawk down. And we're on to David's turn here. Presenting quite an impenetrable board here, at least for creatures on the ground. David doesn't have anything that flies right now, so very weak to the core Skyfisher. Probably why David was keen to get that Glint Hawk out of there. Didn't cost him a ton of resources to get rid of it, since it's only a 2/2. We see 2 mana getting tapped, 3 mana. Another Glimmer Baron. That's only 1 green. Playing a land. Oh, I might have missed that Deadly Dispute earlier. Oh, yes, the Deadly Dispute did get fired off, and you can see the treasure at the top right of the screen there. It looks like Nicolas Cage from National Treasure is representing the treasure token that was generated. That's a fun one. Experimental Synthesizer on Pedro's side, revealing the Galvanic Blast. Trying to decide what he's going to blast here. Definitely has 4 damage available. 3 mana, 4 mana. 3 mana is activating the Synthesizer, getting the 2/2 with Vigilance. But that does exile another card, playing the Ichor Wellspring, drawing another card. So that's 2 counters on the Seeker of the Way. Paying the 1, firing off the Galvanic Blast. Deciding to get one of the Glimmer Barons. And in response, I'm going to activate that Sprout Swarm. Get another Saproling into play there. Make sure to get as much value as possible out of those Convoke effects. Just 2 in the air with the core Skyfisher. Pedro doesn't really feel like getting his life gain nullified again. Once you have enough of these guys in play, especially since the Sapperling is green, the Convoke can pay 100% from creatures, since the green creature tapping counts as the green mana pip on Sprout Swarm. So it's very interesting here. David kind of getting 1 to 2 creatures a turn, and Pedro playing about 4 to 5 spells a turn. 3 to 4 spells a turn. Pedro deciding that getting through this wall of Sapperlings and Goblins is really tough, so sending that Galvanic Blast upstairs, seeing a Kadoltha Rebirth from Pedro, gets his own Goblins. Just sacrificing an Ichor Wellspring, he's got enough of them, getting to draw an extra card. So as we can see here, Pedro is just completely flooded with cards in hand, and that is definitely not a bad thing. He has all kinds of choices that he can make here, making sure that he's got a completely full hand, whereas David kind of has just the one trick of putting a couple Sapperlings into play each turn. It's going to quickly get to a point here. Got 3 flyers that Pedro can attack with at probably next turn. And all these 1/1s that David's going to have to make something happen here, because Pedro's going to quickly overwhelm him with the amount of advantage that he's generating each turn. We see him munitions firing, getting rid of one of the core Skyfishers at the low price of paying for 3 tokens. Going to put a couple extra Sapperlings into play off of that buyback. I think that was like 10 or 15 mana generated that turn off a Convoke. See a Boros Synthesizer revealing the Thorn of the Black Rose. Although this card is very good at creating advantage, David decides to let it go, as basically making himself the Monarch this turn would not do a ton, as he would just have to pass it back to Pedro. He has no way to block these flyers. So he doesn't want to give Pedro even more advantage. Seeing a bunch of creatures tapped. The Boros Synthesizer goes off. A 2/2 is created. Another Sprout Swarm goes off. Seeing Boros Synthesizer again, a Kadoltha Rebirth, and a Lightning Bolt revealed off of the Exile effect. A Golden Egg being revealed here. Sorry. This card is kind of a catch-all. It's a treasure, it's a food, and it draws a card when it comes into play. So it does everything that Pedro wants it to do. It's probably why there's 4 in the deck. And we see the Goblin Bushwhacker, giving all of Pedro's creatures +1/+0 and haste until end of turn. So that was a massive attack, and David decided that they didn't want to do the math, and he just conceded to the Bushwhacker. So here we are on game 2, seeing some more advantage. The Ichor Wellspring getting played, the Chromatic Star getting played, another Ichor Wellspring, a 3rd Ichor Wellspring for the game, and a Colony Garden, making that 0/1 plant. Just a Thraben Inspector, kind of attacking for 1 each turn. Not a huge threat, but this Seeker of the Way can certainly take away the game if it is not dealt with, or if there's not some creatures put in its path. We're going to see that Kadoltha Rebirth go off, buying 3 goblins for the low price of 1 mana and an artifact. 3 Franks for the field. Kind of a perfect fit. Frank Reynolds. Very much like a goblin. Another Rebirth, getting to draw another card. So 6 goblins on the field. I guess that is going to deal with the Seeker of the Way for a while. We see 5 mana convoked with those creatures, buying a Sapperling. Paying 2 goblins? No. That was a little confusing. 2 goblins almost left the field, and then they didn't. We see a makeshift munitions come down. But no more mana to be able to shoot the Seeker or the Thraben Inspector. Boros Synthesizer coming down. Boros Synthesizer, Experimental Synthesizer coming down. Exiling that Ichor Wellspring, getting another Ichor Wellspring into play, drawing an extra card. Attacking for 4. Just chump block it, but can't sacrifice it in response, so the lifelink does go through. With Pedro all tapped out here, probably a good idea to shoot down that Seeker for 2. Got some tokens to spare. Ooh, the Spider Silk Armor. An interesting sideboard choice here. Allows to block the flying creatures, so effectively all of the creatures that David has have reach. And they all get +0/+1. So a much better situation, at least for blocking and even for attacking for David. We see a Sprout Swarm activation for buyback, attack for 2, and then fire off and get rid of that Seeker of the way. Another Synthesizer gets a land into play. Decides to play the Core Skyfisher, bouncing a Synthesizer, gets another Core Skyfisher into play, bouncing the other Synthesizer, which gets a Golden Egg. But no more mana, can't cast that Golden Egg. So Pedro doing what Pedro does best, just kind of generating as much value as possible, while David spins his wheels a little bit. Although he does have a ton of tokens in play, it's not super profitable to attack into these 2/3s anymore. So he's kind of stonewalled, and as much as it is nice to make some tokens, Pedro's just got all of the time in the world to gain advantage from these spells. 2 Synthesizers, a land, and a Golden Egg. No Seeker of the Way in play, so these prowess counters aren't going anywhere, but free land drop is always nice. Basically just playing the cards exiled off the top of his deck. Doesn't even have to use his hand right now. We're going to see the Kuldultha Rebirth, buying some goblins. Sacking the Wellspring, drawing a card. Just a ton of draw effects, a ton of token effects. Seeing another Saproling from the Sprout Swarm. And another Saproling from the Sprout Swarm. Paying 1 to shoot down something. I'm not entirely certain what happened there. I thought he was shooting one of the goblins, but that is not what happened. Got an enormous Glimmer Baron if he wants to attack with it. Unfortunately, with all of those other goblins in play, it doesn't look like an ideal attack. 8, 9, 10 creatures versus Pedro's 6 creatures. Deciding to main phase by a Saproling with 5 creatures. Returns a land to play with a Gruul Turf and just passes the turn. Interesting play. See a Wellspring come down from Pedro. Buying another card. Sacrificing, I think that was a Golden Egg to draw a card. And we're seeing a Lightning Bolt off of exiling or getting rid of one of the Synthesizers. Buying a Golden Egg. Deciding to fire the Lightning Bolt upstairs, 3 damage. Pedro says, I don't really need to attack into you, and it's not profitable to attack into you with that Spider Silk Armor in play, so just pass the turn. Generate some value and pass the turn. That is basically what both of these players are doing. Generate some value, pass the turn. Kind of cleaning up the board state a little bit here. David isolating or condensing his Saprolings onto 1 token. Still has his 4 goblins in play and his 1 plant. See the Experimental Synthesizer. It's going to reveal another Spider Silk Armor, making all of these creatures have +0/+2. Got some big butts now. So all of these 1/1s are now 1/3s that can block and attack into these 2/2s, 2/3s. I almost wonder if it was a misstep to not just swing out there. But I guess he is on a lower life total, although things are about to go bad here as Pedro reveals the Krark clan shaman, being able to sacrifice 3 artifacts to deal 3 damage to each creature without flying, which is the entire field on David's side. Just an overwhelming amount of value off of this play here. Pay 3 artifacts, and I mean, 2 of them are Ichor Wellspring and an Experimental Synthesizer, so draw 2 cards, exile a card, destroy your entire board. He can save the Glimmer Baron, but honestly, it's not a huge deal, and the Goblin Bushwhacker gets shown off the top, and that is going to be game. What a tempo swing. Thank you for joining us for that Pauper match. I hope you enjoyed the Grindfest as much as I did. I want to throw a huge thank you to Spellhold Games for allowing us to record in their space. Couldn't make the channel without them. Also, if you haven't already, please like and subscribe to the channel if you want to see more of this content. Next video on the channel is going to be our Legacy from May 3rd. It's going to be Oops, All Spells versus Ninjas. We'll catch you then. And subscribe right there. It's going to come up right now.